Welcome to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. Join host Susan Gibson as she summons the courage to ask the hard questions, probes deep, dark secrets, and attempts to fill in the gaps while exploring the relationship between her and her mother. Discover the magic of self-discovery, relationship exploration, and the profound journey of forgiveness. Now, your host, Susan Gibson.
Have you ever excelled at something that defined you for years to come, and felt conflicted about that success, wondering where that conflict came from? Well, I've called this episode The Boon of My Success, or How I Excelled in the Patriarchy. Did I excel in the patriarchy? By all outward appearances, yes, I did. And so did my mother. She was a role model of sorts for me, especially in my younger years, and then again in my recent years or last remaining years with her. As part of the partnership between my mother and father, they instilled in me the confidence that I could do or be anything that I wanted. They gave me the freedom to pursue anything that I wanted, anything that I was curious about. They nurtured and fed my curiosity and gave me the tools and guidance I needed to succeed. And I've carried those early days with me throughout my life. I am a father's daughter. I identified with the masculine from an early age. This relationship with the masculine carried me through and taught me how to excel in my academics, in my early career days, and throughout my marriage. All of my choices were masculine and associated with the masculine. Mathematics, computer science, applied physics. In my young years, through my primary school education, I was just fascinated by science and mathematics and thought I wanted to be a medical doctor until I switched that in college and started to pursue mathematics and computer science. I worked as a developer for a Navy contractor. I worked as a management consultant in technology. And, all of these are, masculine fields, primarily known to be masculine fields and masculine pursuits. My mother was also a father's daughter. She grew up in a household where roles were traditional. Mom took care of home and hearth. Dad ran the business of logging in a sawmill. Not long before my mother passed away, she told me this story from her childhood. She was very young. She could walk, but she had no memory of this story firsthand. It was told to her at some point in her life, either from her mother or from her father or both of them. Maybe she was 3 years old. I know I kind of equate my memory of my early childhood, that memory somewhere in the 3 to 4 year range, and I always assume that's the case for others as well. With the sawmill and living in the country, in this community in northern Maine, there was always something that was being built or repaired. My grandfather, my mother's father, one day had a ladder leaned up against the side of a building, and he was doing some work high up on that building. My mother, little Alice, waddled and toddled over to the ladder and started climbing up. Her mother, my grandmother Mary, rushed towards little Alice to take her down. She didn't want her to get hurt, and was always on, high alert with the children and grandchildren as years went by, always on high alert that we were all being well taken care of. My grandfather put up his hand to say no, let her be. He didn't shout out or anything. He didn't want to startle little Alice, but just indicated, just let her be. He didn't want little Alice to be afraid. And when I heard this story, and when I think about it now, My mother's father instilled confidence in my mother in that moment, confidence and freedom, and the feeling that she could do anything. My mother got her confidence and sense of freedom from her father with the support of her mother. They were also partners, even though they had traditional roles in their marriage and in the household. They were a partnership from everything that I've heard and learned and witnessed myself between the two of them. I got my confidence and sense of freedom from my mother and father through their partnership. And these are tools that have allowed me to excel in the patriarchy, and excel I did for 47 years. I had defined and was living my own version of machismo, my equivalent of male strength and power, my female machismo that I had inherited from my mother. And so that confidence and freedom, as it was instilled in my mother, passed on to me. Of course, my father had a big role in that, and he does to this day. But it is different for men growing up, at least in a Western society, than it is for a woman growing up in a Western society. And I could expand that to the world, but my experience is not global in this regard. I grew up in a Western society, and it is different. And so I really look at that passing or that inheritance of father to mother to me. My feminine values about relationship and caring took place throughout all of those years. And I would say I was particularly aware of my success, my excelling in the patriarchy from when I was approaching graduation, or even prior to that graduation from college, because I had already entered the workforce as an intern, as a developer for a U.S. Naval Research Agency, and continued, as I say, for 47 years of my life. That from that moment of college onward, it was there until about 2009. And so my feminine values were taking a second place. I was proud to be goal-oriented and use this as an excuse to not go too far outside of my comfort zone in those years. I anesthetized myself with alcohol and honed my edge with caffeine, because I knew there was a conflict brewing inside of me. However, I didn't understand or have the words or the self-awareness to allow it to come forward. And as I matured and grew over those years, I became aware of the conflict inside of me. The patriarchy wasn't exactly a comfortable place for me, or for women in general. My feminine values wanted to be first, not second. I wanted to be taken care of instead of always being the provider and the one taking care of others. I wanted to color outside the lines and not be constrained by what was comfortable, what was expected. During those years as well, I had split with my mother and then reconnected, working to understand whatever relationship we had, looking for ways to define a new relationship, seeking therapy to help me confront my ogres. It wasn't until much later that I realized my mother was my model for the masculine. All those years that I felt I was succeeding in the patriarchy was because my mother had taught me how to do so. This was an inheritance I got from her. And throughout all those years, I believe I was holding on to the masculine because I was holding on to my mother, or at least the persona that my mother had taken on with me. And while I did excel in those years, my break with the masculine was inevitable. There was too much inner conflict I didn't even fully realize or acknowledge that needed to come out. My unconscious self was battling with my conscious self. My active self-sabotage reared its head and there was no escaping it. I always pictured my self-sabotage as a snake. And perhaps, because throughout the adult portion of those 47 years, I had a recurring dream where I was in a house alone, in the dark. There was an intruder in there with me, menacing, come to do me harm. I couldn't see this intruder, but I knew they were dangerous. I start running down the hallway to the door to outside. Of course, it's dark outside as well. I can sense they're right behind me, but I don't turn to look. I'm 100% focused on getting through the door. Then I feel a bite in the middle of my back between my shoulder blades. It's a snake suspended in the air, straight back, with their fangs embedded in my back, and I wake up. So my unconscious over those years was trying to send me a very, very stark message that, first of all, I needed to wake up. I needed to shake myself up. I needed to do something dramatically different, get outside of my comfort zone. And but I didn't have that awareness in my waking life. This is my unconscious trying to tell me, Susan, it's time for a shakeup. And my snake of self-sabotage reared its head in 2009, came into my conscious being, into my conscious life, and that self-sabotage ended in a public breakup with a boss of mine at the time that did shake me to my core. And goodness, I would say the repercussions of that lasted at least 10 years for me. It was a very dramatic breakup. It was just the shakeup I needed to start me towards my path of forgiveness with my mother and forgiveness with myself. That it was a necessary break with the masculine that occurred at that time. When I think about those years and the outward view of success that I had, my career that had progressed over those years, my earning that had progressed over those years, the respect that I was getting from my colleagues, my position in my marriage family that was there in those years as well, and the inner conflict and inner turmoil about the relationship with my mother and trying to find a relationship with her, thinking I could get back to a relationship and realizing that there's not one to get back to, going into therapy for a short period of time in those years to kind of align myself more with some of the conflict I was feeling in regards to her. And that therapy certainly helped me face, some of my ogres as well, and better understand some other patterns of destruction that I was engaged in, and particularly my insomnia in those years. That was just very much taking over my waking life as well, and living in a highly sleep-deprived state. All of those things, the excessive drinking, my obsession with caffeine, my insomnia, my version of machismo, that feminine machismo that I had inherited from my mother as the role model of how to succeed in the patriarchy. That was all the outward accoutrements of success that I had. All the while that inner conflict was going on. And while I did my best to stay true to who I was, there undoubtedly I assimilated to behavior that I saw as successful around me. And that conflict, I had a values conflict, I had a moral conflict, I had an emotional conflict going on all at the same time in all those years. And, that it manifested itself with, again, my excessive drinking, obsession with caffeine, my insomnia, the choices I was making, my feeling of entitlement that I had in those years, the pride that I had. My ego was extremely out in front of everything that I did, and I was not necessarily a patient person or a thoughtful person, and that caused me great conflict because inside of me I am. And that break in 2009, was the shakeup that I needed. It still took me a few years to really appreciate what that breakup did for me. But the breakup was essential. I needed to break with the masculine, and it happened in 2009. And I was very, very close to my boss. He was the CEO and founder of the company I was working with at the time. And I had a very emotional attachment to him and he to me that was not healthy. It was always in the realm of professional, but unhealthy. I've kind of equated this with he was my spiritual leader at that time in the business world, and in my professional world, he was my spiritual leader. And when the break came and the act of betrayal on both our sides, he betrayed me and I betrayed him. That break felt like a spiritual break to me. And it really shook me up. And like I say, it took a few years for me to overcome that, actually. Of course, I had to remain professional and I had to find my next gig because I was the provider in my marriage, and a lot of people were depending upon me, and a lot of bills needed to get paid, and I had to carry forth and set my next goal and go forward towards it. But that breakup allowed me to start to let my inner self come through, and allowed me to really look for what it was I wanted. And I would say that probably set in motion not only my path to forgiveness with my mother, path to forgiveness of myself, but also the breakup of my marriage, and looking for a way to really step into who I was and who I am today. And it's remarkable as I reflect on this. It takes a lifetime to find out who you are. I'm still learning about myself. It takes a lifetime. And we've got to, one thing I've learned is that we've got to be open to all of the channels of input that are coming our way. And we have to be discerning. But first, the openness, because if we're not open to what the universe is trying to tell us, we're going to miss the opportunity to step into who we really are. I would say that's been a fundamental and groundbreaking lesson that I've learned over these years, that once I could remove the noise around me and really let the universe, the voice of the universe come in. The universe speaks to us all the time, but we're not necessarily attuned to that and have the ability to hear that. And, once I let that in, my life changed dramatically. And I would say I am still still successful, but now I am a whole person. And I'm working very much towards that integration of self with all of these other roles and personas and expectations and all of that come our way. How do you integrate all of that and allow your true self to come through? And it happens with a lot of hard work. And you do first have to go through a break of some kind. And that break with the masculine, it happened to me and with me. I was an active participant in that break in 2009, is what allowed me to realize I needed a fundamental shift in how I was approaching my life and how I was allowing all those external influences to guide and direct me and lead me to believe I was a certain person or persona, that I'm not actually that person. And the goal orientation is one, the need to kind of manage everything was one, to be very much embroiled in detail was one. And what I've realized about myself since then is that I'm not actually any of those things. And it's incredibly liberating. However, it's also frightening, scary, because you move entirely outside of your comfort zone when these things happen to you. And you just open yourself up for new adventures and new opportunities that will change you and change the course of your life in radically different and incredibly rewarding ways. And I wouldn't have changed a thing throughout those years, though those were definitely years of high conflict and turmoil for me. As I reflect on all of these things in my life and reflect on where I am today, I welcome this conversation about how to acknowledge that inner conflict and sharing our experiences about these things and sharing our stories about these things and how we're feeling in the moment and how we're feeling now, I think are vital to us to gain a greater appreciation of our fellow human beings. And so if you've experienced something similar, long period of success while feeling conflicted about it all, or want to go deeper into untangling those feelings of conflict, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have that conversation with you. You can email me at hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com. Thank you for being with me today and listening to my podcast, Finding Forgiveness, a Family Fairy Tale. I welcome your comments. A big thank you to the team at Produce Your Podcast for helping me share my family fairy tale. Until next time, I'm Susan Gibson, signing off with gratitude and appreciation.
Thank you for listening to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. To continue the conversation, visit findingforgivenesspodcast.com and send an email to hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com to share your story. Until we meet again.